Welcome, everyone, to our Chats with Two Rabbis this evening. It's Tuesday, January 19th, the day before our inauguration of our new administration. We're very excited and pleased to have Rabbi Zvi Kahn and Rabbi Barry Silver with us to talk about Torah and more. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, rabbis. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for joining us, everybody. It's a thrill to be here back again with Rabbi Kahn to discuss another exciting Torah passage. This is one passage which is an indication of why the Torah is such a bestseller. Probably the most popular book in all of human history, because it's got drama, intrigue, and classic conflict between good and evil. So here we go. Rabbi Kahn, would you like to share some thoughts on the passage?
Thank you very much, as always. Happy to be here and be part of the group. In this week's Torah portion, Bo, we have the last 3 of the 10 plagues. And as we know from our Passover Seder every year, this is what breaks the camel's back, so to speak, or in this case, this is what breaks the Pharaoh's back. Once the 10th plague, the killing of the firstborn hits at midnight, the resistance of the Egyptians breaks down, and Pharaoh's own resistance breaks down, and the Jewish people, he releases the Jewish people. Not only does he release them, but the Torah narrates that he calls in Moses and he says, leave immediately, get out of here, because they no longer can can deal with the plagues. And so he tells Moses, take the Jewish people and leave. And of course, the Jewish people have to leave quickly. And that's where the matzah, that they didn't have time to let it bake, comes from them. But what's also very interesting in this week's Torah portion, and something that's often overlooked because of the drama, as Rabbi Silver mentioned, the drama and the excitement of the Exodus from Egypt, is the fact that the very first commandment is given to the Jewish people. It's not the very first commandment in the Torah. The very first commandments in the Torah actually came all the way back, predate Abraham, and then he himself was given the commandment of circumcision, of Brit Milah. But the first commandment given to the entire Jewish people as a people appears in this week's Torah portion, and that is the commandment of making a calendar and having it be a lunar calendar, and having it start with the month that the Jewish people leave Egypt, which we now call the month of Nisan. Also, we call it Chag HaAviv. We call Passover the springtime festival, because it occurs always in the month of Nisan, which the Jewish calendar works out to always be in the springtime. And so Passover is the holiday of springtime, because that's when the season when the Jewish people left Egypt. But I think what's really, there's so many different interpretations and commentaries on why is this the first commandment, this commandment of a calendar. And I think one of the most really simple comments that I saw that I think is really, really beautiful is the idea that the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, so they have their freedom. And so the Torah says, once you have freedom, then you are in control of your own time. You have to take control of your time, what you do every day, what you do every week, what you do every month. Until now, you were slaves. And so the Egyptians controlled your time. At any time, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, they could tell you what to do. But now that you're free and you're being released from bondage, you must take control of your time. And that is an idea that is certainly as important to us today as it was to the Jewish people back in the time of the Exodus. And that's the idea, one of the ideas behind the mitzvah of making a calendar, the commandment of setting up a calendar, a Jewish calendar appearing in this alongside of the Exodus, story of the Exodus from Egypt.
All right. Anything else you want to cover, or is that good?
That's my starting point, and I'm sticking.
You're not locked in. You can always jump back in. So this is a very interesting passage. It's called Bo. And I recorded the Shabbat celebration from the Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. And it was a beautiful day out. And all I could think of is the French phrase for saying it's a nice day out. Il fait beau. So Rabbi Khan, you know a little French? Il fait beau. So I thought, that's appropriate. This is beau, and il fait beau. And also I heard Biden, and he was talking about his son, Beau. So he's mentioning his son, Beau, while we're reading about Beau. I thought, this is very, very interesting. I guess there's some divine origins to this Torah after all, because it seems to predict what's going on in the world today. So again, we have another episode where God is hardening the heart of Pharaoh and of his retinue and his courtiers. And each time you're kind of thinking like, how could Pharaoh be that stupid? I mean, all these horrible things are happening. And each time the Torah makes sure that you get the point. It says, nothing like this has ever happened before in all of Egypt. Like there's hail, like it's never happened before. There's locusts, it's never happened. There's darkness, this has never happened. It's trying to make sure you understand, by the way, this isn't just some kind of weird climactic occasion. This is something unprecedented. You'd have to be a blockhead not to get it. And the servants are saying to Pharaoh, come on, don't you see what's going on? How could you be so clueless? And then each time Pharaoh says, yeah, you're right, I'm gonna let him go. And then all of a sudden, after he decides to let him go, it says, but God hardened his heart. And now he changed his mind. And why did he change his mind? Well, God likes the number 10. You know, so 8 plagues doesn't really sound so good. You know, if you're going to create a movie or a book and you want it exciting, 7 plagues, no, you got to have 10 plagues, especially with the climax, the last one, I'm going to kill all the firstborn. So Pharaoh just keeps saying, yes. And then God's going to harden his heart just to make sure you get it, that this is me doing it and everybody's going to know. So then finally he leaves. Now, Rabbi Khan says, now we're liberated. Well, not really. What happens is we trade one master in for another. Because as soon as they're liberated, boom, there comes God with his commandments. Okay, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to do this. I mean, left and right, there's all these different commandments. And some of them, for me, are rather distasteful, literally. Because God orders the Jews to be carnivorous. He says, you have to, I command you to eat the lamb. You've got to eat the lamb. Not only do you have to eat the lamb, it's kind of grisly, but you got to eat a lot of grisly parts. Remember this, Rabbi Khan? The head, the head, the legs, the internal organs. I mean, this is pretty grisly stuff. So the other thing that's really weird, you got something in the Torah that's really hard to explain. So the people who are writing this, they realize, wait a minute, how is this going to be explained? The problem with the Torah that's hard to explain. So the Jews are slaves. Now they're released and they're wandering around in Egypt. But when you read what's going on in Egypt, they're like constructing an ark. They got all these building materials. They got all these building tools. They got all these fancy wardrobes to wear. The priest is wearing sashes and girdles and all types of stuff. And they've all got gold and silver. They're like loaded down with heavy metals. They're contributing gold and silver to the golden calf, and they got all this jewelry. They got everything. So the question is, where do they get all this stuff from? I mean, they're slaves in Egypt. How do they possibly get it? So now you have something that's even more incredibly implausible, maybe, than the dividing up of the sea and the plagues. What happens is, you see, the Jews asked the Egyptians. They said to the Egyptians, hey, you know what? We could use a little financial help these days. Could you help us out? We're going to take a trip and we need some provisions. And supposedly the Egyptians say, hey, no problem, help yourself. Have some gold, have some silver, have some stuff. So they kind of like give everything to the Jews. And then it says, and they really liked Moses. He was really popular. So Moses asked them, and they said, yeah, help yourself, have all this other stuff. And then it also implicates that the Jews felt, hey, you know what, we've been slaves for all these years. We're entitled to something. So they kind of took what they needed to get out. So there's a lot of implausible parts of the story. If you're willing to forget all of that and learn the lessons of the Torah, then you learn, then you get to the part that's really interesting and really exciting. And that is that the Egyptians hardened their heart and it came back to haunt them. They were really hard on the Jews and made their life miserable. And eventually the plagues hit them. When you're mean and nasty to other people, it's going to come back to haunt you. And that's what we see with ourselves today. you know, if our leaders harden their hearts to the people are going to get upset and bad things are going to happen. If we exploit animals and we have factory farming and we do horrible, disgusting things to them, then we're going to have all types of diseases and climate change and environmental problems. What it's trying to say is, I guess, what Martin Luther King said, and we can tie it in. All right. So Martin Luther King had this to say. He said, "We are all caught in an inextricable network of mutuality, a single garment of destiny. What happens to one directly happens to everyone else indirectly. And therefore, be careful how you treat other people, because it's coming back to haunt you." And that's really what we see in this passage. And that, my friends, is literally true. It happens all the time. You kind of sow what you reap, and you reap what you sow. And so we need to be careful. So that's my take on this passage. Rabbi Kahn, you want to share a few more thoughts?
I'd love to open it up and talk about all the things that are going on, but just to make one connection, because I'm so glad you mentioned Martin Luther King. We are in the Torah passage, and the Torah passages where Martin Luther King took some of his most beautiful imagery and his most beautiful biblical phrases and talking about let my people go and freedom and the whole imagery of the Exodus from Egypt and the slaves becoming liberated. It's such a fantastic connection. And so I'm happy to open it up and talk about Martin Luther King Day yesterday and his legacy and his his dreams for and aspirations for not just the his people, so to speak, but for America and for the world. So just a great natural connection between so many things that he stood for and spoke about and the Torah passage.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Martin Luther King again. Also, I want to share something, and I'd like your take on this, Rabbi Kahn, and everybody else too. Feel free to weigh in. It's very interesting that Martin Luther King was a Christian pastor, but do you recall him ever talking about Jesus? Just think about it. In his speeches and his writings, when does he talk about Jesus? Virtually never. The one he talks about is Moses and Amos. He gets his inspiration from the Jewish prophets. I find this fascinating. He sees himself like a modern day Moses. You might ask, why would that be? Why would he identify more with Moses than with Jesus? Well, according to Christian scripture, and I don't believe Christian scripture literally any more than I believe Jewish scripture. In fact, I believe it a lot less, which is saying quite a bit. But according to Christian scripture, Jesus said, "Obey ye every law of man and God," because these laws were ordained by God. Therefore, there were many Christians who opposed the American Revolution. You can't revolt against the King of England. He was appointed by God, divine right of kings. And the Bible says you have to obey all the laws. You guys who are revolting against the king, you're violating God's law. So many of the traditional Christians had nothing to do with the revolution. They didn't believe in it. Similarly, when Martin Luther King was marching for civil rights and violating the law and questioning the government, a lot of his Christian supporters were saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we're okay with speaking out, but you can't violate the law. You can't do demonstrations like this. You can't protest. That's not in keeping with the teachings of Jesus." Jesus was crucified by the Romans. He never objected at all. He just said, "Go for it." He had no problem. Moses, on the other hand, Moses defied authority. Moses was a rabbi rouser. Moses stood up against the dominant authority of his time and had no bones about challenging them. He didn't think they were appointed by God at all. So it's interesting that Martin Luther King identifies very closely with Moses, even says, "I've been to the mountaintop, I can see the promised land." But he really doesn't have much to do with Jesus at all. And that's why I think that the United States, judging from the founding fathers, who also had nothing to do with Jesus and were really pretty much deists, kind of like Jewish rational thinkers, and also Martin Luther King, they really based their belief system and their ideals on Jewish scripture. I think this is really a Jewish nation, not so much a Christian nation. Anyway, I'd like, Rabbi Kahn, I'd be interested in your take on that, as well as the others.
I don't know Martin Luther King's, writings and speeches well enough to talk about whether he spoke about Jesus or not. I'd be really surprised if in his sermons in the churches throughout his lifetime he didn't talk about Jesus. But I think you're talking about his public speeches,
Right.
his public discourse, and that may very well be true. I don't think there's any doubt, however, that his identification with Moses and is very, very clear, and leading his people out of slavery and out of bondage is crystal clear. But let's open it up.
Who wants to share some thoughts about the Torah passage, Martin Luther King, or what's going on in the world today? We got the inauguration tomorrow, a lot of stuff happening.
Thank you for your insight, both of you. It was very, very refreshing. It always is. Anybody else
Thanks.
want to go ahead, Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Ehrman. In this passage, there's two really interesting themes going on that you might want to dwell on. For me personally, one is the relationship between slave and master, and also much more important for us is that issue of Jews as a chosen people and Jews as a choosing people. They choose to go free, and they're chosen by God in this case, but they also make the choice to leave Egypt. And in my take, that's much more important, that we make decisions as Jews to do certain things, not to simply obey, So
Yep.
I'd be interested in the rabbi's take on those two issues, slaves and choosing chosen.
Yeah, Paul, I agree with you 100%. I don't accept the notion that God chose us. I don't ascribe to a supernatural God doing much of anything. So I agree with you. And I think it's more to our credit to say that the Jewish people did the choosing. We chose a certain lifestyle. We chose to try to emulate certain ideals and prophets. And that's something that says something good about us rather than we just passively were chosen. And I think the evidence bears that out, that we weren't specifically chosen. I mean, it's like in the Fiddler on the Roof when Tevye says, couldn't you have chosen somebody else? What were we chosen for? All this persecution. So I happen to agree with you. However, if you look at the Torah reading, the Jews didn't really choose freedom so much, because what happened was Moses comes along and says to Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh makes their life more difficult and they have to make their own bricks. And the Jewish people chose to stay and chose Pharaoh over Moses. They said, Moses, quiet down. Stop being so political. Just stick to your prayers. Don't do this. You're making things worse. Now, when the Jews were let out, the Jews again said to Moses like half a dozen times, we want to go back to Egypt. Let us go back to Egypt. Things were much better there. Look what you're doing to us. We're going to die in this God-forsaken wilderness. We had free room and board. We had a place to stay. We had everything there. So they really weren't all that thrilled about freedom. And what that shows me and you and everyone is a lesson. And that is that many people would rather stay in their comfort zone than face the fear and the risk of doing something different and truly being free. They'd rather be a slave to old habits than be free with the uncertainty of what's going to happen. Now, right now, L'Dor Va-Dor, we're in a building that we've been in for 3 years. We can't even use the place. We're paying a lot of money for it. But still, some people say, let's stay there. So what if we can't use it? It costs a lot. Let's just stay there. However, I believe that if we decide to use our freedom and to face the unknown, we'll find something much better. And that's something that's exciting to think about. So everybody has to look at this passage and read into it what they will. But the passage, although I don't believe it's literally true, speaks a truth that we've seen. Most people would rather stay in their rut, even if it's destroying them, than try something new.
Allegory of the cave.
And we shouldn't be afraid to try something new.
Valerie, you want to?
I was just mentioning to Mishka, there's Plato's allegory of the cave. People will believe what they want to believe. You could face the wall and see the giant shadows, or you could turn around and see that in reality, they're not giant at all. They're just little ants that are being reflected being giant. If you face the truth, you can overcome it, but you got to face the truth. And a lot of people don't want to do that. Really.
Very, very true.
Yeah, and just to the past several months having these discussions has been almost, to me, mind-boggling, quite honestly. We started out saying that during Hanukkah, the 8 days and the oil lighting has nothing to do with the burning oil and they weren't really Maccabees, they were Hasmoneans fighting the Greeks and the Medes. Then the next week we were talking about Abraham not really being a Jew, he wasn't the first Jew at all. And then the next thing we're talking about is Moses might not have existed, who knows for sure, and that God really isn't God, it's just a cosmic entity. I'm about ready to call the mothership and beam up. I don't know what the hell to believe anymore. Think about it. Hello, beam me up, Scotty. I don't know.
Hey, I did one of the Shabbat celebrations about Star Trek, so that's not too far off. But Rabbi Khan, I think you have some education to do, because poor Valerie is starting to buy into a lot of my mishigas. So maybe you can straighten her out and let her know that it's all true, that she shouldn't have these doubts.
If the sessions are causing all of us to rethink ideas and to view things from new perspectives and different perspectives, I'm certain that's Rabbi Silver's goal, and I think it's a great goal for us to have to rethink things and think about things from new perspectives and different perspectives. There's a famous statement in the Talmud that says, "Shivim panim la Torah." There are 70 facets to understanding the Torah. In other words, we should never just approach things in our tradition in only one way. We have to look at different meanings and different intentions and different commentators. So it's good, Valerie, that if you're a little confused, you join all of us. We're all a little confused and sometimes not sure about things, but we're grappling with the issues, we're thinking about them, and that's what the weekly sessions are all about. I want to touch on for a moment on what Paul, the issue you raised about slave and master. And I don't have any kind of answer. I just want to mention something that is to me, very thought-provoking and profound. And that is that as terrible as the time was under Egyptian servitude and in Egyptian control, as terrible a time that was, and we celebrated every year leaving that and being liberated from slavery, nonetheless, the Torah in several places says, be kind to the stranger, be kind because you were a stranger in the land of Egypt. You needed you were dependent upon other people for your livelihood. And so remember what that was like, and therefore always be, sensitive to the needs of other people. So it's so strange when you think about it that the Torah would choose to use the Egyptian experience for us to learn ethical and moral lessons from about the need to be dependent upon other people. But it does, and it does it in numerous places. So that issue of slave and master, Paul, that you're mentioning, and how that relationship can be more complicated and how we can learn more from it than one might think, I think is very important, very pertinent.
Karen, did you want to say something?
I was thinking about something I read during the campaign where the writer had discussed that a lot of people who live under fascism, dictatorships, communist governments, they say that they were looking at the people in the United States and the other Western countries, how we were living through the pandemic, saying that's why fascism is good, because they tell you what to do. You do what they say and you'll be safe. You follow the rules and everything will be fine. Now look what's going on over there because they're free thinkers. But here we are, because we're free thinkers, look where we are in the world. We do so much. We live so diversely. We come up with these ideas and plans for a future that none of us will even be here for. So I was kind of thinking about that when you were talking about how if you don't, if you just follow the rules and all of that, it doesn't get you anywhere.
Karen, you raise a good point in that democracy is pretty messy, and it's not nearly as efficient as a dictatorship. If you want efficiency and you want to have somebody lay down the law, then autocracy and dictatorship is much better. But the thing is that the democracy has the advantage that you have a lot of people having input and making rules, and so you have a much better chance of having rules and guidelines. They're going to make sense, they're going to be the best, and that everybody's going to buy into. So, you know, there's a story, and it's an allegory about Ben Franklin. After the Constitution, they said, did we create a monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. And I think what we've seen recently is that this democracy that we have isn't guaranteed. And there's a lot of advantages to a dictatorship that some people like. There's also certain religious ways of thinking that lend themselves to dictatorship. So for instance, if you have a rigid authoritarian view of the Bible, God wrote it, God said it, I'm going to do it, there's people on earth who know God's will, we're going to obey God and we're going to obey his vicars on earth, and we're going to, if you have that mentality, then you're very susceptible to a dictator to come along and take over. And it's very interesting that when we saw footage now of the insurrection in DC, we saw Christian white nationalist supremacists literally taking over the Capitol and praying in the name of Jesus, and taking over the Capitol in the name of Jesus, because they believe that Jesus and God are the dictators, and they're just their slaves. And Paul, what you mentioned about slave and bondsman, and really the Jewish people, if you think about it, and according to the Torah, gave up living in slavery under Pharaoh and instead became slaves of God. They actually refer to themselves as slaves or servants of God. The thing is that we have trouble understanding is when an American thinks slavery, we think the South. We think pre-Civil War South United States. That's slavery. But when the Bible uses the word, they don't have the word slave in Hebrew. See, that's a problem with language. They use the word eved. Eved means like a servant, someone who does, related to avodah, someone who does work. Well, you could be a worker, not necessarily a slave. And what was going on in Egypt may have been different than what we're thinking, because it's saying that the Jews asked them for things and they responded, and we don't really know what the conditions were like. Being a servant of God or a slave to God seems like a horrible thing, but if you conceive of God as your better nature or a unifying force in the universe, then being an adherent of that isn't so bad. So we have to try to understand there's different nuances to the word slave. From my perspective, the great thing about being human is that we have a rational mind and free will, and if we use it, that's what makes life exciting. I'm not interested in being a slave to anybody or anything or any concept. And what Valerie's talking about, questioning, challenging, having your mind open to think new thoughts, that's what it means to be alive. That's how you know that you're awake. That's how you know that you're not just going through the motions, that you're actually coming closer to truth, because we all of us, should at any moment be ready to just give up our preconceived notions if they don't seem to be sensible or logical, and choose a better way. That's what it means to be Jewish, to be at any time able to see a better way and not to be a slave to ourselves and to the past. Anyone else? Raylene, what's your take on all this?
You're muted, honey. Raylene, unmute yourself. Click on the little microphone on the bottom of the screen.
I have no thoughts on it, please. It's very deep for me. It's very.
That's good. All right, well, you can digest it and let us know tomorrow.
I'm just learning to be free to my own thoughts. It's taken me about 80 years, but I'm doing it.
Raylene, it's never too late. I'm glad you're learning to be free with your thoughts. I want to share something else for everybody, okay? This is something that I think about. I don't think anybody else would think in these directions, but the word Tu B'Shvat. Anybody here speak French? All right. Well, the word tu, basic, T-U, tu, means you. Now also there's another word in French, tout, T-O-U-T, it means everyone or all, right? So what Tu B'Shvat means to me is that you and everyone are involved in protecting the trees. And you also have the English word T-O-O. So we too are involved in Tu B'Shvat. This is not a holiday where you're passively saying, oh, these trees are really nice. What Tu B'Shvat is telling us is you and I and everyone else also, we're all needed to protect the trees because that's something that we depend upon. And I'll be delivering a message from the Wildlife Reserve about trees. And I also suggest at the end that we should engage in triage when we deal with other people, a triage system of how can we deal with people who think differently than us or people who might be indoctrinated? How do we deal with them? I adopt a triage system. And you have to watch Friday night to see if you agree with what I'm saying about triage. And also there's two types of trees that we really shouldn't have much to do with. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Most people think all trees are good. Not all of them. We should avoid bigotry and idolatry. Those two trees we should have nothing to do with. All right.
And Melaleuca trees.
And the Melaleuca tree. There you go.
I was going to say
Yeah.
any tree that's not native to our environment that people have thrown our way through come over on a ship or a train or whatever from another country.
Yeah.
We should try
Well,
to.
now I have to add that to my whole concept of what is a Jew. We're tree huggers.
There you go.
I
Yeah, we have
actually,
a holiday.
Valerie, I actually
with a
had a
tree.
video that was kind of like that, but I just didn't think it fit for this Friday.
I think it would be great. A tree hugging video would be great.
It was not exactly that, but
All right. So tomorrow night's going to be a big occasion. We got the inauguration coming up, and L'Dor Va-Dor is 100% committed to bringing everybody together and trying to unite our community. And so far, we're doing a good job. We're bringing people together at different sides. Tomorrow night, we're going to have another discussion about unity. I got a couple of people who I think will be joining us. I'm not going to share anything yet because none of them are sure things, but it looks like we will have a couple of guests talking about how to bring everybody together. So anybody have any final thoughts? Any other things they'd like to share with us? Karen, are you still running around?
she's muted, but we have somebody new that just joined us, Beverly.
Oh, Beverly.
Beverly, you missed the
Hi.
conversation, but do you have anything you want to share?
No, I'm sorry, I missed it out. So bad. I forgot about it, so I'm late.
That's
Wow.
all right. Beverly, what do you think about what's going on in the world and in the country today? You have any thoughts you want to share with us?
Well, I'm scared to death about tomorrow.
Oh, you mean you think that there's going to be terrorism?
Yes, I'm just, nervous about it, put myself on. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
kind of nervous about it, especially where I saw this, what is it, a dozen now? National Guardsmen have been taken off duty.
Yeah.
Well, you had about 10,000 armed soldiers, about 7,000 CIA, about 1,500 Special Forces, Secret Service. There's an article that came out, I don't know if you saw it, and it shows all of these military people and all of these big fences with barbed wire around it. And the caption reads, "If you need 10,000 armed soldiers to protect your inauguration from the people, then you probably weren't elected by the people." And that was it was a very interesting article, and it really brought us full circle to where we've come, from where we were 30, 20, 30, 40 years ago, where we had quote unquote peaceful transfers of power. And now the capital is looking like Afghanistan. I mean, that's pretty damn scary as
It
far as
is
I'm
scary.
concerned.
It's like
You know,
a
I don't care
banana,
whether you're a
it's like a banana
conservative
republic.
or a liberal, you know, intelligent people, rational people don't behave like that. I don't care what side of the aisle you're sitting on. You know,
Valerie, where's that
it's
article?
very scary. My brother sent it to me. I'll try to forward it to you. It said, it actually read 10,000 armed soldiers, but now we've known it's increased with all of the military and security forces. It's almost 17,000 that it's in Washington with all, it's really unbelievable what we're looking at right now.
Valerie,
I mean, this
why do you think
country is
that's
going through
happening
some
now
type of a change.
when we've never had that kind of issue before? We've never had threats before. Why is that happening now that we need all these people to protect us?
I think a lot of people have this newfound freedom and don't know what to do with it. Just like you were saying, freedom takes responsibility. And I think we have a lot of people now, because of what's been going on the past 30 and 40 years. We talked about it last week with not having civics education, not knowing your recent history, not knowing how to deal with different people, different rationalities, different economic situations, different religious situations. We talked about it last week, how in general, our educational system has just crumbled. So we can't relate to what has happened in the recent past. And if you don't know what happened in the past, you're destined to repeat it. And that's the scary part. That's the scary part. Because we have our millennials now who are learning from the boomers, but the Generation X, whose parents are now the millennials, haven't had the kind of education in civics and in our recent history that we at this generation have had. So they don't understand what's going on and the dynamics between different types of people and different philosophies and how to handle it. And that's really, from my perspective, where we're having issues. That's my problem. That's what I'm seeing.
I want to ask you something, Valerie.
What we have here is a failure to communicate, basically.
I'm just gonna get my tea.
Mitch McConnell has now said that President Trump is responsible for inciting or prompting this takeover, this insurrection. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that's why we have some issues, because of his incitement, or no?
Yes, it is accurate. He did say that. And he and what's his name?
McConnell?
No, the Democrat from
Biden.
Schumer and Biden are meeting, I think, sometime tomorrow. There's a tradition that they go to this particular church, and Biden and both of these other leaders, and maybe I think a few more, are going to Catholic Church.
Yeah. But I think what you have here is you have a generation of people, or maybe even two generations of people, that don't think. They don't think, they follow. And that's where our problem, in my opinion, is.
I don't think
a lot of people that
a
don't
whole
think.
generation like that.
Yes, and that's part of what I'm talking about. You know, it's our educational system, you know, has really, in my opinion, in many instances failed us, because they're not teaching people how to think. They're teaching people how to follow by rote memorization.
I don't know, if you look back at your own school career in the public education, how many teachers taught you to think? You
All
count
of
them
them,
on your hand.
thank God.
I can think of about
I
four.
knew about our recent history. I knew about our Constitution. I knew about our laws. I knew there were 3 branches of government. I mean, come on. You ask a person now how many branches of government there are, they don't know. Name them. They don't know. They can't give you 3 names. They can't give you the 3 branches of government. They don't know in many instances. So we have a generation and a half, maybe even 2, that really don't have a firm grasp of what this country is all about.
I think you're right, but I think that the people who are the ones who are being followed and led astray are the same ones that are led astray on religious lines. They're used to ignoring facts and reason and thinking based on blind faith. And I also think that a lot of the people who are behind this are the same ones that never accepted the fact that they lost the Civil War. There's a lot of people there who think that they're refighting the Civil War right now, and they don't like the influence of African Americans on the government, on the voting, and they're really upset about that.
Well,
and as far as the protection goes, some people might think, well, this is kind of overkill. But I want to remind everybody that Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her own military, her own guards. Anwar Sadat was assassinated by his own guards, infiltrators within his own ranks. And within the ranks of the defense, the Capitol Police and the National Guard, there are a fair amount of people that are rather sympathetic towards the, I'll call him the former president, and they've been radicalized. All it takes is one of those guys on the inside to pull the trigger and Biden's gone. So this is a very, very scary situation here. It's not like you need tens of thousands of people to protect them. If you just have one guy on the inside, he's history. And this is a very scary time. And so I'm concerned, not just for tomorrow, but for the next 4 years. There's a lot of people that really hate Biden. And a lot of them don't believe in gun control. A lot of them have 2, 3, 5, 10 guns at their home. And it's going to be a very scary time. And we need to really rally behind peaceful transition and getting everybody together. I see Cantor Carol Garrett on the line. What do you have to say about all this? You want to share a thought?
Hi. I don't know. I'm listening. I'm trying really hard to just see every person as a person. I do agree with a lot of what you said. People are radicalized. They sort of are almost living in another dimension, believing things that are untrue and, you know, following a completely different thought process, reality. I'm just hoping that those people calm down. I think now that Trump is not reaching out and pardoning some of these people that have failed, and maybe it'll start shaking them out of their dream and back into reality, I hope. And I hope with Biden taking over and being in power, you know, a lot of times people want to be behind the person that's winning. And when Trump is not winning, maybe they'll drop out and, you know, stop following him. I do think there's a faction of people that are anti-Semitic and racially motivated, but I think there's a lot of people that I even know personally that it's not about that. It's about, you know, sticking with the winner and believing that there's some sort of demons that are going to come with getting rid of Trump, or, you know, or Trump not being, you know, I mean, really, I've heard that from people that, you know, he's keeping the demons away.
Well, he's God's chosen.
That's not rational, though.
It's hard to really understand, but, you know, some of those people that are kind of, you know, super, what's the word I want, you know, Christian right, I guess, you know, they believe in a lot of that. So I'm hoping, you know, to see tomorrow, I'd like to see Biden behind a bulletproof plexiglass, you know, or maybe even just have the ceremony somewhere else and not out in public.
I think he is going to be.
I wish that they would do that. But I'm glad that there have been so many Jewish people that have become elected, and that Biden is continuing to bring a female for the first time to the main stage. And I think we go up from there. You know, hopefully Trump showed us all of our evil and all of our darkness, and we can begin to eradicate it at this point.
Well, you know, Biden has a whole minion of Jewish people working with him. It's amazing, all the Jewish people that he's got by his side. So I think probably good things are going to happen. But it's not just the Christian right, it's the Jewish right also. The Jewish right is also strongly behind him. Maybe, Rabbi Khan, I was wondering if you have any thoughts about why that might be, or do you think that's going to stay that way, or are they going to support the new regime, or what's going on with these folks?
You know, I don't think I have any particular insights except to say that obviously Trump moving the embassy, there, you know, people are very passionate. In the Jewish community, there are people very, very passionate about Israel, and they were very touched by the fact and impressed by the fact that Trump moved the embassy and did other things that were very supportive of Israel and worked with other countries to start the peace process up again in a way that was very, you know, good for Israel from their perspective. And so I think that, you know, they became very committed to the Trump cause because of that. There's no doubt in my mind, and I know this from talking to several people, that the events of that happened at the Capitol and the insurrection have made them question, even the strongest Trump supporters in the Jewish community are saying, wait a minute, this is not what we're in for. This is not, part of what we're about. And so I'm hoping that people will at the very least say, okay, there were some good things that we liked, but overthrowing our country and being a threat to democracy and being a threat to the future is not what we're about. And so, hopefully that will at least change some of those minds. We have to hope.
I have to wonder why it took that to change their minds, not ripping babies away from their moms at the border and all the many other things, the Muslim ban and all these other things. Why did it take an insurrection to change their minds? And I just wanted to throw this in there. I do think that a lot of people, let's say we're talking about the Jewish Republican voters or the Jewish Trump voters, that a lot of them are one issue voters. And I think a lot of Trump voters and supporters were one issue voters, whether it was the abortion thing, the Israel thing, whatever it might be. And that may start to crumble away because people may start to say, I can't be a one issue voter and only vote for who I think is going to make a change in Israel or in the abortion law if this is what it's going to do to our country.
Karen, I think you raised a good point. I think people are going to start taking another look at some of their preconceived notions and maybe broaden their horizons a little bit. As far as I'm concerned, I'm really thrilled about the changeover, but I hope that all of us will make sure that the forces within the Democratic Party that are against Israel, that we make sure that they do not gain ascendancy and that we make sure that the Biden administration continues to be strongly aligned with Israel. I have every expectation that will happen based on his past and based on the people that he's surrounding himself with. We just need to keep an eye out and make sure that Israel is going to continue to be a close ally of the United States. Emily, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to apologize
for the first time.
I had another meeting,
Okay.
but and so maybe this has been brought up. But Karen, you're absolutely right. Trump gave a little piece of whatever it was to various groups. So his strong anti-Cuban policy got a lot of the Cuban voters. His moving the embassy to Jerusalem got a lot of the Jewish voters. He didn't really follow through with anything, but he gave a little bit to so many groups that he became the darling of the one issue voter.
Right.
And he thought that was going to carry him through. I think we all have to think more globally.
Thanks, Emily. Mishka, go ahead.
Yeah, for the first time in history, a president to be, well, Biden was, he nominated and the Senate confirmed a transsexual male to female to have a position. I think it's in the environment. I'm not sure about that, but that's for the first time.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, if you look at all the different. Yeah,
Carol
there you
has her
go.
hand up. Okay. Carol, go ahead. Carol?
Actually, no, I didn't have my hand up. I'm sorry if I did that. by
Oh, okay.
mistake.
Okay.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah.
One little thing, we have to remember that Joe Biden has Jewish grandchildren.
Well, so does Trump. So
Well,
let's move
no,
on.
One of the things I was going to say one of the things I'd like to say though is we have to be very careful about being overly smug. We have half the population of this country are alienated and angry, and we cannot play, we're the winners. We have to find some way of healing this country, and it's not going to be all our way. And we have to maybe we have neighbors that voted for them. I don't know what the answer is, but start it by avoiding talking about politics and worry about maybe potholes on the street or our school. Does it have enough, material for our kids? We have to find some way of getting past this rather than being smug. And I fear that's going to be the case.
Hey, Paul, you know what? I agree with you, and I addressed it on Friday night. Martin Luther King had the answer to what you're saying. He had the vaccine against hate. He said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. You're right, Paul. We got to respond lovingly and harmoniously with everybody. Go ahead, Beverly.
I watched a documentary on the civil rights movement on Turner Classic Movies last night. And another movement that I was active in civil rights, and I don't even remember this, that another movement that he wanted to start before he died, was getting people together who had something in common, people of all races, colors, and so forth. And the thing that they had in common was poverty. They were poor. So he got together, he started it, but it never went anywhere after he died. He got people together there were white people, there were black people, there were all kinds of colors and ethnic groups, but they had something in common, and that was they were all poor. And I said, well, what a great idea, because all the hostility that they felt toward one another, they still had that one thing in common, and that was one thing they could work on together. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. Maybe Biden will come up with something like that.
Yeah, well, Beverly, we have the Interfaith Justice League that I created it, and I've been working on it for the last 20 years. We bring people together of different religions to work on different causes.
Yeah, I know.
And to have dialogue. So that's really, really important. I happen to think that a lot of what has galvanized the pro-Trump people is a great distrust and even a hatred of government. There's a lot of people that don't care for government very much at all, and they think that we'd be better off without it. And they don't like a lot of the things government does. They don't like government helping the poor. They don't like government trying to protect the environment. They just want to make their money, take care of themselves, and they're not really interested in what's going on around them. And they don't like government. And Trump,
they all like the Medicare and Social Security checks.
Right. But the Republican Party has largely been anti-government. They say we're against big government, but really they're against government. They don't like government doing any of these things. They want government just to stay out of their life, except when it comes to abortion. They want government off their back and into their bedroom. But other than that, they don't like government. And Trump was the champion of that. He said, I don't pay taxes because I'm smart. So in other words, he doesn't even believe in funding the government at all. Like, if everybody did that, there wouldn't be a government. And I think a lot of people responded to that. And I think the Democrats have to look at themselves and say, we need to make a better case for what government's able to accomplish and make government respond better and not be so corrupted by money. And we need to let everybody know, people on all sides of the aisle, that government is not there to solve all our problems. Government is there to help us to overcome obstacles and to bring us together and to spend money in a conservative manner. I think we have a lot of work to do, but I agree 100% with what Paul said and what so many others said. We cannot be smug. We cannot be arrogant. We cannot say, ha ha, we won, you didn't. And we need to get everybody together. As I said, I will be addressing that on Shabbat. How do we deal with all the other people out there? How do we do it? Check it out and see what I say about triage, how we should respond. And I'd like to get your response to it. I think we've had a great discussion. If there's anyone who wants to conclude, I'll let them conclude. Otherwise, I will just say, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Kahn. You know, this is one of the few places where we can have civil discourse, different points of view. Nobody gets mad. Because you know why? We follow Abraham. And you know who Abraham was? He was a nomad. And so there's no mad people among us.
God.
We are nomad people. All right,
But was he
everybody.
Jewish?
Well, I'm sorry I was late. Bye, everybody.
Great to see you all. Take care.
Thank
See you
you,
next time.
guys. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.